She had been told to wait outside the mission briefing. Her badge said, "Support Crew," but no one had asked her name. While the others reviewed tactical maps and loaded magazines, she stood alone near the fuel drums, her gloves still streaked with grease from the generator she'd fixed before sunrise. No one questioned her silence. They assumed it meant she didn't belong. Then, a senior officer arrived. Not with fanfare, but with a glance that lingered. And suddenly, the comms went quiet. Protocols paused, and within minutes, every eye that once overlooked her was following her lead instead. Because one system had failed, and she was the only one who knew how to bring it back online. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story intrigues you, please consider subscribing to hear more untold stories of extraordinary service and the heroes who walk among us, never asking for the recognition they deserve. The floodlights swept across the surface of the water in long, slow arcs that made the ocean look metallic. Farther out, the cargo freighter sat like a shadow, all decks dark, no signal beacons lit. The support ship buzzed with energy by contrast. Rotors turned overhead as the helicopter prepped for launch. Crew boots clanged against catwalks, and clipped commands bounced off the metal bulkheads as operators finished their checks. Under the canvas roof of the main prep tent, the mission team was already gathered, suiting up in full gear, black body armor over black flame-resistant suits, visors hanging loose from harness hooks. Jessie stood near the edge of the tent, next to a stack of weatherproof crates. Her gray utility jumpsuit didn't match the rest. No armor, no weapons, no team patch. A small toolkit hung from a loop on her hip, the canvas faded and scratched from years of use. She hadn't spoken since stepping on board. She knew she wasn't expected to. Her job was to observe the electrical draw on external systems during the breach, not to engage, not to assist, and definitely not to speak. The atmosphere inside the tent felt like pre-game adrenaline. One of the younger SWAT operators tossed a sealed carabiner from hand to hand and cracked a joke about how fast they'd be back. Another adjusted his earpiece and said something about the ship being probably empty anyway. Someone passed around a marker and signed the drone camera wing like it was a locker room whiteboard. Nobody looked Jessie's way. She noticed a taped schematic on the side of the drone rack, half peeling away at the corner. It was a kill switch relay diagram for the freighter's control grid. She walked a few steps closer, tilted her head, and scanned it. The notation was old, marked before the blackout. Whoever had drawn it labeled the relay deck as sealed, but she caught a misnumbered node. No one else had commented on it. One of the breachers turned toward her and gave a sideways nod, just loud enough for the others to hear. "Hey, ballast," he said, jerking a thumb over his shoulder. "You taking notes or just keeping the crates warm?" Someone behind him laughed. Jessie didn't answer. She kept looking at the schematic for another second, then stepped back to where she'd been standing. A second operator, broader and louder, walked past holding a coil of rope in one hand. He stopped in front of her for just long enough to make it clear he was making a point. With exaggerated care, he dangled a single zip tie from 2 fingers and said, "Here, in case you want to help, keep that toolkit company." More laughter followed. A few glanced over their shoulders to gauge her reaction, but Jessie didn't give them one. She took the zip tie gently, tucked it into her belt pouch without a word, and returned to her silent position by the crate. The lights above flickered for a moment, reacting to a surge from the generator load as the helicopter's engines throttled up. The pitch shifted as the rotors accelerated. Final checks were being called over open comms, and the mission lead raised his voice to quiet the chatter. A few operators straightened, pulling gloves tight and cinching harnesses. Jessie remained still. Her name wasn't mentioned in any of the flight calls. A media liaison snapped a quick shot of the SWAT team as they lined up for final load-in. The flash illuminated their faces just long enough to cast Jessie's figure in silhouette behind them. The photo appeared on the internal stream a few minutes later. It was cropped to show only the tactical team. Outside the tent, The air was heavy with sea salt and electrical charge. Far out beyond the floodlights, the rogue cargo freighter drifted in slow lateral motion, engines powered down, its hull angled slightly against the tide. The briefing had described it as flagged but unresponsive. No contact. Running cold. No transponder acknowledgement in over 72 hours. Intelligence suspected stolen tech in its lower cargo decks. Possibly crewless, possibly booby-trapped. Either way, the boarding team would fast rope to the main deck, breach the control house, and run a full sweep. That was the plan. Jesse already knew it wouldn't hold. Another operator brushed past her on the way to the gear locker. He didn't slow down but muttered, "She's not even on the op list." She heard it. So did the two others standing nearby. No one corrected him. No one defended her. They didn't need to. That was the assumption. Jessie wasn't mission side. She was a technician, a floater, a safety signature on a clipboard nobody read. The mission commander, a tall man with a blunt haircut and polished helmet rig, stepped out of the forward cabin and called for load order. His voice cut through the low murmur. Alpha and Bravo lead in 10. Prep systems green. Command will go dark once you're on board. He looked out over the team and gave a brief nod. This is a clean op. No complications. Let's keep it that way. His eyes swept the tent and passed over Jessie as if she were part of the crate rack. The first operators moved toward the helicopter with practiced precision, their steps heavy on the steel grate. Jessie followed at distance, keeping outside the camera frame and command zone. She clipped her toolkit tight to her belt and adjusted the gloves in her pocket. Her boots thudded softly against the deck. No one stopped her. No one acknowledged her. As the helicopter blades roared louder, the red deck lights switched to white. The night wind shifted, bringing the scent of oil and salt. The SWAT team loaded in. Cameras caught the liftoff in wide angle. Jessie stepped into the rear jump bay and took a seat near the internal equipment cabinet. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes remained steady on the power monitor, reading the bleed values line by line as the helicopter climbed toward the rogue ship. They were looking forward. She was watching everything else. The helicopter circled slowly above the freighter, its blades stirring fog into ghost-like curls that trailed across the ocean surface. The cargo ship below remained silent, its decks unlit, its hull streaked with salt and corrosion. On board the Navy support chopper, Jessie stood just behind the co-pilot seat, one gloved hand resting on the wall rail as she watched the team descend in pairs. Each figure dropped swiftly down the fast rope, boots hitting steel with practiced confidence. Their shadows moved like clockwork across the thermal feed. She said nothing. Her headset stayed on standby. Inside the cockpit, red light pulsed softly across the instrument panels. One of the monitors to her right flickered twice, then settled into a steady diagnostic pulse. Jessie leaned closer. Power draw from the cargo ship had surged, then dipped sharply. That should not have happened. She tapped through the display filters, isolating the command channel node, then froze as the readout updated again. The ship was rerouting power through an emergency grid. Not standard. Not automatic. Someone, or something, had actively redirected control. Her voice came low and calm as she keyed her mic. She didn't raise her volume. She didn't panic. "I'm reading a recursive feedback loop through the bridge relay," she said. "Looks like a manual override triggered from mid-deck. If they try to breach the control room now, they'll trip the surge buffer. It'll fry the access panel and lock them out completely." There was a pause on the channel, a rustle of static, then a voice, clipped and impatient. "Repeat that." Jessie did. This time she added, "You need to cut the voltage at its return path first. That means going in through deck 7 or below. Otherwise, the control board will reroute every time the system reboots." From the left side of the cockpit, one of the officers gave a short, exasperated exhale. "You want us to rewire the freighter from here? Just give it a minute. They've got breaching gear." Another voice joined in from the team lead on the deck. "We've got this. Charges placed. They're going in. Jesse tried again. If the feedback loop spikes again, you'll lose entry on all 3 doors. It's in a locked cascade. I can see the surge pattern on screen. You're not on this team, came the response. Not shouted, not cruel, just flat, final. She stood there for a moment, her fingers still lightly resting on the display frame. The red indicators blinked again. More erratic now. Voltage spiked for half a second, then dropped. Jessie opened her mouth to speak, but the next sound in her headset wasn't a voice. It was silence. Her comms link went dead. She checked her panel to confirm. Her call channel had been removed from the group. She wasn't muted. She was cut. In the cockpit. No one looked at her. The co-pilot leaned forward to adjust the forward spotlight. The systems operator scrolled through external feeds, watching the SWAT team regroup on the freighter's top deck, still attempting to breach the forward hatch. Behind them, Jessie stepped back 1 pace. Her screen still showed the feedback path lighting up like a heartbeat every 10 seconds, growing stronger. She didn't say another word. Back on the ship below, the boarding team was clustered around the main doors, trying to cut through. Sparks flew as their thermal torch grazed the reinforced edge of the frame. On infrared, the outline of their bodies wavered in the dense fog. Each time the blade reached full ignition, the system on board pushed another voltage ripple through the external hull. It wasn't visible to the eye, but Jessie saw it clear as text. The circuit was fighting back. Her name was no longer on the operator list in the system. She scanned it anyway. There was no override channel, no alternate input. She wasn't cleared. In the rear of the chopper, one of the logistics crew leaned in to speak to another. The words weren't meant for Jessie, but the volume carried. That's what happens when tech writers try to play ops. She's here to read numbers, not call shots. No one corrected him. The ship below pulsed again on thermal, brighter this time. Jessie looked once more at her now muted screen. Her breath stayed even. Her gloves flexed slightly as she made a single fist, then released it. She didn't speak, didn't turn, didn't react. In the silence of her comms channel, the only sound was the low, constant hum of power routed wrong, a loop repeating, a ship resisting entry, and all of it visible to one person who had been told, without hesitation, that she wasn't needed. Authority filled the air in that cockpit. Uniforms, rank insignia, voice commands spoken with certainty, but none of it stopped the freighter from rerouting its systems against them. Jessie didn't move for another 10 seconds. Then she reached to unclip the toolkit from her belt and slid it quietly across the floor toward her seat. She sat down next to it, eyes still locked on the diagnostic screen, now steady with red pulses moving like tidewater. Her name remained absent from every list, but she knew exactly where she was going. The wind had shifted. The rotor wash no longer swept across the support ship. The helicopter had repositioned, banking slowly in a wide holding arc above the drifting freighter. Inside the cargo bay, Jessie clipped her toolkit into place on her harness, tightening each strap until nothing rattled. The sound of the latch was faint under the thrum of the rotors, but it echoed clearly in her own head. Her comms were still dark. No mission audio, no telemetry, no voice chatter. She was disconnected, silent, invisible. Jessie reached for the rear sling hook and lowered the cargo hatch halfway. Cold air rushed in as the sea rolled far below, whitecaps cutting through the dark like fractured glass. The freighter's hull was massive beneath them, dull black and motionless in the water. No exocrine transponders. The entire vessel seemed asleep, but Jessie knew better. She could feel its power grid pulsing even now, rerouted through hidden channels, sealed behind control panels the breachers would never find. She stepped into the opening without a sound. Her boots, fitted with magnetic plates, clicked softly as she dropped into position against the sling. One last breath. Then she descended, The underside of the cargo ship loomed up fast, its hull slick with seawater and algae. Her gloves met steel, and she locked in. The wind screamed past her shoulders as the sling retracted and the chopper banked away. Now she was alone. No signal. No rope. Just gravity, salt, and the endless groan of a ship that didn't want company. Jessie moved deliberately. One step, then another. Her boots gripped the hull with each shift of weight, their magnets holding firm. The ship creaked beneath her. Far above, she could just make out the infrared outline of the SWAT team still trying to force the upper deck doors. They had no idea she was here. Her breath fogged inside the visor. She shut off the external light on her helmet and moved blind. The crawl space entry she needed was 20 meters forward and 2 meters down. There was no guide rail, no marked path, just memory, steel curves, and guesswork. She had studied the deck schematics before, though no one asked her to. This ship was a converted freighter, retrofitted for relay storage. That meant the electrical heart wasn't on the bridge. It was deep, hidden, waiting. She reached the underside intake and knelt slowly. The panel covering the ballast hatch was bolted shut, but corrosion had weakened the seam. She pulled a hand wedge from her kit and slipped it beneath the lip. A twist, soft and steady. The bolt cracked, one pull, and the hatch opened inward. The tunnel beyond was narrow, built for cable feeds and emergency drainage, not human passage. Jessie slid inside on her elbows, toolkit dragging behind her, clipped to her belt. Her body pressed against cold metal on every side. The air was damp and metallic, filled with the scent of seawater and oil. Somewhere above, the ship groaned again, its weight shifting slightly in the tide. She crawled forward, past the ballast junction, until she reached bulkhead 5, Charlie. Her shoulder scraped against a welded seam. She gritted her teeth, turned sideways, and pushed through. Every motion was quiet. She never rushed. The toolkit bumped once against the floor, a hollow tap that vanished into the steel. Finally, she reached the narrow corridor that ran under deck 7. The passage was dim, lit only by the faint green flicker of old cable indicators still active inside the wall conduit. At the far end, behind a rust-marked hatch, was the relay panel she had seen in the schematic. She opened it with both hands, slow and careful. Hinges squeaked, then held. Inside the panel, 4 relay blocks blinked in rhythm. Misrouted current pulsed through them in cycles of 10 seconds. It was beautiful in its own way, a closed loop fighting to stay alive. The system wasn't broken, it was defending itself. She reached into the kit and pulled out a circuit tap, laying it gently along the base panel. The relays hummed. Her gloves steamed slightly from body heat and condensation, one by one. She disconnected the primary feeds. Then she found the miswired node. It was tagged with a faded mark, barely visible under the grime, a small red ring drawn in grease pencil. She'd seen that mark before. It was standard on retrofits from a certain class of build, the kind that didn't show up on modern scans, the kind she used to diagram in training rooms no one else sat through. Jessie took the cable loop in both hands. It vibrated faintly in her grip. She clipped it loose, let it dangle for a moment, and watched the relay stabilize. Power dropped by 20%. Then the loop died. The entire ship exhaled. Every sound shifted. A quiet hum overtook the buzz. The surge cycle had stopped. She didn't celebrate. She didn't move. Instead, she reached into the relay panel and rewired the bypass, rerouting power to a dormant failover circuit she knew would lead to the original control stack on the interior deck. Not the bridge, not the demo target, the real core. The light inside the panel changed from red to amber. She tapped the relay once to ensure it held, then closed the cover and latched it tight. Her breath echoed inside the visor. Outside, the ship rolled slightly on the tide, but no alarm sounded, no lights flared. The system hadn't rejected her. It had simply waited for someone who knew where to look. With the toolkit clipped back into place, Jessie turned and began the long crawl back the way she had come. Her boots tapped softly against the hull with every step. She didn't speak. She didn't stop. She had crossed the threshold, and she knew now what had to come next. She wasn't here to prove anything. She was here to finish what none of them could start. The bridge of the cargo ship was barely lit, its floor wet from condensation and the slow drip of seawater leaking through a vent seam. Jessie stood at the center of the room, shoulders rising and falling with slow, even breaths. Her gloves were streaked with oil. Fingertips blackened where she had stripped the last cable from the locked panel beneath Deck 7. Her boots left faint tracks as she stepped forward, water pooling behind her. Every part of her suit was soaked through. Her hair clung to her face. The kill switch relay, still warm from overload, rested in her left hand. Overhead, the emergency lighting flickered to life, first red, then amber, then finally white. The noise that had filled the ship for the past 20 minutes, systems grinding, doors sealed, circuits buzzing went still. In that pause, Jessie didn't move. The broken relay hung limp in her grip, the last current drained. Steam rose from the exposed control banks at the back of the bridge. One panel crackled once and fell silent. The ship's power grid had stabilized. Lock systems began to cycle, not with force, not with noise, but with a soft series of magnetic clacks that echoed down the corridor outside. Then the first impact came. The main bridge door blew inward. The SWAT team flooded in with tactical precision, weapons raised, boots slamming against the steel floor in a practiced wedge formation. But no shots were fired, no commands were given, because Jessie was already there. She stood facing them, visor up, oil-slick gloves at her sides. No weapons, no armor, just her soaked gray jumpsuit and the burned relay coil still faintly steaming in her hand. One of the SWAT officers paused first. He lowered his rifle, just slightly. Then another followed. The room had gone too quiet for chaos. The lights were steady now. The ship was breathing differently. Behind the tactical line, the squad lead took 2 steps into the bridge and stopped. Jessie met his eyes for only a moment. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her headset crackled, then clicked. The channel reconnected. Faint static passed through. A quiet voice, female, probably from the support ship, broke through the silence. The words weren't clear, just the shape of them. Someone near the back of the room whispered, "Is that her?" Another operator glanced sideways, stunned. She wasn't even cleared. No one corrected him. No one moved forward. The kill switch in Jessie's hand hung like a challenge none of them wanted to take. She turned toward the command interface and placed the relay gently on the console, blackened wires curling slightly against the glass. Then she reached for the internal node switch and toggled the reset. The ship's systems acknowledged her touch without resistance. Displays refreshed, diagnostics cleared, all access ports marked as open. It was done. Jessie wiped her glove across her cheek, leaving a faint streak of grease along her jawline. Her expression didn't shift. No triumph, no defiance, just clarity. She had finished what they failed to begin. The squad lead took another step forward, but still didn't speak. His gaze dropped to the relay. His jaw tightened. Around the bridge, the other operators slowly lowered their weapons. One set his rifle against his leg and rubbed his face with both hands, disbelief settling in like smoke. On the far wall, a cracked comms panel reactivated. Jessie's name lit up on the unit log, no rank, no clearance tag, just her name, blinking green. No one said thank you. No one had to. The silence wasn't awkward now. It was reverent. The shift had happened, and everyone in that room knew it. Jessie stepped back from the console, nodded once without smiling, and walked past the team without waiting for acknowledgement. No one blocked her. No one asked a single question. She had rewired a ship that resisted force. She had bypassed a circuit that outlasted the breachers. She had done it with no orders, no permission, and no audience. And now, standing in the aftermath, she asked for nothing. The truth of what had happened was written in the steam rising from the coil. It was written in the stillness of the bridge. It was written in the posture of every man who once looked through her like she wasn't there. She didn't explain herself. She didn't need to. When the lights of the freighter came fully back online, casting full white arcs across the open sea, Jessie was already walking down the corridor toward the cargo bay ladder. The deck under her boots felt more stable now, as if the ship had stopped resisting her, as if it recognized her. The red lights still pulsed along the outer railings of the Navy support ship, casting long streaks across the wet deck. The water beneath the lift shimmered in the same steady rhythm, broken only by the faint hiss of mist carried on the night wind. Jessie rose slowly on the cable lift, her boots planted wide, her shoulders steady. Her gloves were streaked with dried salt and engine soot, and her gray jumpsuit hung heavy with seawater. In her right hand, she still held the blackened kill switch relay. It dangled at her side, lifeless now, but unmistakable. Above, the hangar crew had gone quiet. As she cleared the final edge of the lift gate, the wind caught the loose strands of her hair. She didn't adjust them. She didn't speak. The first thing she saw was the line of figures waiting near the mid-deck. Tactical operators, flight crew, systems monitors. All of them had been there earlier. All of them had looked through her. Now, they stood shoulder to shoulder, weapons holstered, expressions unreadable. No one spoke. Jessie stepped off the lift and began walking. The deck beneath her boots echoed with each step, muted only by the wind. Her movements were slow, but certain. She did not glance left or right. She kept her eyes forward, her posture level, her pace unchanged. She passed the loading crate where a man had handed her a zip tie just hours before. He was there now, helmet off, eyes lowered. He didn't move. The SWAT team that had boarded the freighter was already lined up outside the tent. Their uniforms were dark with sweat and fog, some still marked with soot from the blown access panel. Their rifles were slung behind their shoulders, hands free, backs straight. The squad leader stood at the center. When Jessie reached them, he lifted his right hand slowly, palm forward, and brought it to his brow in a silent salute. It held. One by one, the others followed. No one said her name. She walked past them without slowing. The relay still swung lightly at her side, tapping once against the leg of her jumpsuit. A whisper followed in her wake, just loud enough to catch the air. She wasn't even on the roster, but no one said otherwise. As she moved down the corridor toward the upper deck, the red lights began to cycle down. The emergency status had been lifted. The system recognized stabilization. The operations crew began to move again, but slowly, with glances that lasted too long. No one called out. No one offered orders. She was beyond them now. Near the flight operations terminal, a digital panel refreshed. The screen had shown a list of approved personnel since the start of the mission names and statuses, roll tags, clearances. Until now, her line had been blank. No icon, no title, just a gray dash. The screen blinked. One more line appeared. Ops log writer Jessie status resolved. She didn't look at it. She didn't need to. But two systems techs standing nearby saw the change. One of them glanced toward her as she passed, eyes wide. The other said nothing but tapped the glass once with the back of his hand, as if making sure it was real. Jessie made her way to the outer platform where gear was usually checked in. A single set of gloves had been clipped to the drying rail there earlier that night, left behind by someone in too much of a hurry to finish prep. She pulled hers off slowly and hung them next to the pair already swaying in the breeze. For a moment, both sets of gloves moved together in the same wind, side by side. She stood there for a few seconds, her head tilted slightly as she watched the water below. Then she stepped back inside and made her way toward the lower corridor. Behind her, one of the SWAT operators turned and started to speak. His squad mate touched his shoulder, shook his head once, and the man stopped. There was no need. The ship had changed. Not just its systems, not just its lighting, but the air itself. Jessie reached the end of the hall and paused. In a recessed panel to her left, A command log printer had begun to run. Its soft clicking broke the silence. A new strip of paper emerged, time-stamped and tagged. Her ID number, her route, her override, confirmation of reset. She didn't tear it off and she didn't sign it. Instead, she walked back toward her locker station, unhooked the toolkit from her belt, and set it on the floor beside the bench. Her shoulders rolled forward once, then settled. She pulled the elastic from her hair, let it fall, and ran her fingers through the damp knots, without urgency. On the shelf above her seat sat a folded windbreaker. She reached for it, still wet from the ocean mist earlier that morning, and pulled it over her jumpsuit without bothering to dry off. Somewhere behind her, footsteps approached, then stopped. She didn't turn. She heard them retreat a moment later. No one called her name. No one asked for a debrief. That, too, was its own kind of salute. The weight of the kill switch was gone from her hand now, left on the operations table. It would be tested, labeled, filed. But the mark had already been made. Jessie sat down at last, elbows on her knees, watching the red lights along the upper beam fade to white. She didn't close her eyes. She didn't lean back. She simply waited. And somewhere on the other side of the ship, someone else was saying, "She walked through all of us like we weren't even there." They weren't wrong. But the ship knew. The relay knew. And every man who had lined that corridor he knew, too. The recognition didn't come through medals or announcements. It came through stillness. It came when no one dared interrupt her anymore. She was never cleared for the mission, never handed a weapon, and never asked to speak. But when everything failed, when the breach stalled, the systems locked, and the team stood frozen, she moved. Not for credit, not for recognition. She acted because she knew how, and that was enough. Her strength was never in being seen. It was in being steady, quiet, certain. The kind of certainty that does not demand attention, only results. She walked through silence, carried no rank, and left the bridge standing because someone had to. If her journey reminded you of the power of quiet resolve, take a moment to reflect. You do not have to be loud to be right. You do not need permission to do what must be done. Let us know what part of her story stayed with you. And if you value stories like this, follow for more. There are many more still untold.